I
Get started.
suppose we might as well get started. We do have somebody coming before the board tonight. Sorry, I'm not looking at the agenda right now. I have been looking back. We are seeing something about Birch Brook today. And I did want to mention to the new folks on the board, Dana and Sade, who weren't on the EAC last time we saw this project come before us, that we do have we have seen this project before. And there have been some changes in the law since the project came before us the last time. And I'm not sure how much detail we should get into before they speak with us, but I do have some background information, a report I compiled based on a site visit that I did in January of 2020, I believe it was. And I will forward that to you guys because I would like to get your input if possible, before we make a response. And can we, Jaime, can you or Stuart clarify with us, is there a limited comment period because this came before the planning board on the 28th, right?
Yeah.
If you give me a second, I'm going to pull up the wetlands ordinance.
I had sent you all yesterday an email. Now, unless your emails are messed. Oh, and that reminds me, if you access your emails through webmail, which most of you do, it is unfortunate. Your emails are, if you have not been able to get your emails, those emails are gone. Unfortunately, we had a major problem here with emails, and I've been advised today that to the extent that emails came through, if you're going through your webmail to do that, those prior emails that, except from September on, you will not be getting them back. So
that's a really good point. That's why, I would like to just speak quickly again that there is a lot of background on this project. I would really like you guys to know the background story here. We have lost our emails because I looked back before I came to this meeting to see if I could find my email to the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals, and it was gone. So I will forward all you folks whatever background information I have, and I do suggest that if you do have a moment, to go back to the Planning Board meeting of the 28th, because there were some members of the public who had some things to say, some neighbors of this property who had some things to say, and I think it's important for us to, consider the totality of the application here.
And Erica, my recollection is I think it's a 30-day period, but that 30 days can be extended upon mutual consent of both applicant, the planning board, and the EAC. So if you thought that you needed additional time, that is certainly something you can, make the request for.
Yeah, so if I can, I'm going to read a little section of the code for understanding of how this works here. So under procedure, upon receipt of an application for review by the planning board shall refer the application to the Environmental Advisory Council for its review and report. The EAC shall issue its report and recommendations to the planning board within 30 days of the referral date or within such other period as may be specified by the planning board. The date for the EAC to submit its report and recommendations may be extended by mutual consent among the planning board, the applicant, and the Environmental Advisory Council. If the report and recommendations are not provided in a timely manner, the planning board may assume that there is no objection to the granting of the application. In the case of permits sought in conjunction with subdivision approval, the planning board shall hold a public hearing on the requested permit concurrently with the public hearing on preliminary subdivision plat approval. Public notice and notice to interested parties of the wetland permit shall be provided along with notice required pursuant to the village code for the hearing on preliminary subdivision plat approval. Planning board shall issue a final written decision on the wetland permit as part of the decision on final subdivision plat approval. In the case of permits sought in conjunction with site plan approval, the planning board shall hold a public hearing on the requested permit currently. So this is not really pertinent to this project. And so, I mean, I think that one last thing, the planning board, building inspector, and EAC in review of any applications for wetlands permit approval may refer such application to such professionals, including planner, engineer, environmental expert, wetlands consultant, attorney, or other consultant engaged by the village to review the application as deemed necessary. In the event the differing reviewing authorities want to use consultants for their review, the authorities should attempt to coordinate use of the same consultants, and duplication of consultants' reports shall be avoided whenever possible to minimize the cost of reports to the applicant. All provisions of Chapter 91, Article 3, building construction fees shall be applicable to wetlands permit applications. So the applicants here are here for wetlands permit associated with their final plat plan. So they've already gotten preliminary subdivision approval. At that time, they did not have a wetlands ordinance, at least not the same wetlands ordinance that we have now to comply with in terms of the buffer areas and everything else. So they had to modify their changes. Those changes have been, at this point, reviewed by the planning board's wetland consultant. As I just mentioned, if the EAC would like to have somebody from Keller Session, the wetlands review consultant, come back to the EAC to talk about this, you're welcome to do that. So all you need to do is just ask, and we can have them come to this meeting and talk about it, talk about their review of it. But essentially, you're looking to report back on the project, I guess in general, specifically on the wetlands permit aspect of it. So if you'd like, I can bring them in now, or Erica, if you'd like, you can, if you'd like to kind of cover other stuff first. We can't hear you.
Sorry. I think that we'll just listen for now. And like I said, please, I will send all the members of the board an email with some links afterwards. And I would really encourage you to just spend a little bit of time immersing yourself in the history of this project, because it is in one of the few village wetlands that we have. I will just say one thing is that the impetus for us developing this wetland law is because we noticed in our initial review, one of the big flags that was raised for us was that a small portion of the corner of this property is in the village of Briarcliff. The village of Briarcliff at the time of the first applicant submission did have a much stricter wetlands law than the village of Ossining. And in the meantime, we did manage to change the law, and because they had not gotten some sort of approval, I'm sure Stuart can tell you better than I can, but because they hadn't had a certain approval, they did have to resubmit this application. This is a lot that has shared property with the village of Briarcliff. So I do think we should keep that in mind moving forward, that the impetus for the new wetlands law really was some of the problems that we observed with the initial application from this applicant. Thank you. We can let them in.
Hi, Dan. We have you, we have Paul Sisek, we have Rajiv Kapoor. Are any of the other people here also part of your group? Jim Drohan, Alexandra Farrell, A. Guccione?
A. Guccione is with JMC. He's on our team as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Daniel Patrick from the law firm Cuddy & Fader. As indicated, I'm joined this evening by Mr. Paul Sisek and Anthony Guccione from JMC, the project engineers, as well as Rajiv Kapoor, the owner and the applicant in this process. A lot has been said just now about this project, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will just recap briefly where we are in this process. We did receive site plan and preliminary subdivision approval for the proposed subdivision of 81-89 South Highland and the construction of 5 new residential townhouse units on the eastern portion of the site. Those approvals were granted in February of 2020 after an extensive environmental review and appearance before this council and consideration of the wetlands impacts as well as all of the other environmental considerations during the secret process, which was concluded with a negative declaration at that same meeting in February 2020. We are here this evening on referral for the wetland permit application. As indicated, there's not much left for the subdivision review, considering it's already gone through an extensive review and it's been approved by the county health department, and it's really not a significant subdivision itself. The actual development has also been approved during the site plan application. So what we're here tonight is why we're here tonight is to share the the modifications to the plans that have been incorporated to address the necessary mitigation requirements of the new wetland ordinance. As required by that ordinance, a 1-to-1 mitigation plan is required for any impacts to wetlands or the new wetlands buffer. We are not proposing any development within any wetlands as defined by the code. Any wetlands buffer impacts or any disturbance of the wetland buffer is being mitigated at a 1.75-to-1 mitigation ratio. So we're significantly exceeding the necessary 1-to-1 ratio. And with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Paul Sisek or Anthony Guccione to share their screen and walk you through some of the specific mitigation measures that are being incorporated into this project. If they can share their screen, I think that'd be helpful.
Go ahead.
Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Chair and members of the board. For the record, Paul Sisek from JMC Planning and Engineering. Just put together a short presentation for you guys to bring you through our site landscape plan and wetland mitigation plan that was put together. So bring up the first slide here is the site landscaping and wetland mitigation plan in its entirety that was submitted to the planning board as part of our wetland permit. It shows the Walden Road is here on the right side or east side of the property. And the existing facility 81 to 89 Birch Brook Manor is over on South Highland Avenue to the left, which is on the west. So this is the parcel that is part of lot number 2 of the subdivision, and the the proposed 5-unit multifamily building is shown here. The next slide is just a blow up and color rendering of the same plan, and you could see our proposed wetland mitigation is defined by this area that's in color. So that is the complete mitigation area that we have. The wetland boundary is indicated by the blue that I'm highlighting with my cursor right now. That's the west bank of the wetland watercourse corridor that was delineated in the field, and this is the east bank of that wetland watercourse corridor. And then there are additional wetlands that were delineated on the eastern side, which is that perennial drainage channel that is located off the property. So when you assign the 100-foot buffers, which are indicated by the green dashed lines to the right side and to the left side, they go over and are part of the proposed development area in this area. So we supplemented the already reviewed landscaping with additional wetland mitigation behind the building and on the east side of the wetland corridor with plantings. And to the left side or western portion of the corridor, we have an extensive cleaning of the existing understory of invasive plants and trash and debris that has collected over the years. Respreading existing topsoil and then seeding with, wildlife mixes. And any trees that are dead will be cut down and left and placed strategically to help promote the natural breakdown for that and to create habitat for animals and flora as well. The next slide is just showing our plant schedule. Most of you have seen this. We've added some wetland mitigation planting species to the list, namely right here in the deciduous shrubs area and under the ground cover where we have the wildlife food and shelter mix. The next are the plant notes. These are just some details about the specific mixes that will be included with the mixes. And then here's our summary table that's on the plan, and it explains the math to get us to the 1.75, almost 2-to-1 mitigation ratio based on the areas that we're proposing to mitigate. Put together some plant palette pictures so that you can have an idea of what we're proposing plant-wise on the property. A lot of these are the front end plants that are going to be within the development area and between the proposed development and the neighboring properties. But as you go to the second slide, it shows some of the mitigation planting species that will be planted as well in the buffer. And then we have the restoration mixes, some pictures of what that mitigated forested area will look like. We did receive the CalArts Sessions review memorandum from September 23rd, and they had two. They were in general acceptance of the mitigation plan that we put together, but they had two comments that we would be happy to address. One was to create a physical delineation between the east side of the wetland buffer, which is behind the proposed building. They suggested a fence, so we're going to be proposing a post and rail fence 4 feet high with wire mesh attached to it, which will help keep garbage away from the wetland area, from the proposed development, and also it will create a barrier for animals to stay within the wetland corridor and on the undeveloped portion of the property. The other comment was they wanted a little bit more detail on the procedures of the wetland mitigation and the removal of invasive tree species and vegetation. I think the real thing that we want to drive home is that we will not be proposing to have any mechanical equipment go over the stream that's there. So, everything that will be done on the left side of the bank inside the wetland buffer will be done by hand and thoroughly cleaned of trash and debris and invasive species. And then, like I mentioned before, the existing topsoil will be respread, and we will seed with the two various mixes. One other thing that they also suggested was that we include some additional temporary erosion and sediment measures along the banks of the stream. We have no problem doing that. We thought typically you would install silt fence, which is a towed-in fabric, geofabric that stops and collects dirty water from runoff in disturbed areas. We felt that might be more intrusive than helpful because you'd have to, tow in 6 inches and excavate along the rivers, the stream bank. So we thought that maybe we can use some core logs that are, jute rolled things that you can tap in place with stakes to help any sort of potential runoff from going into that stream. So That's the end of the presentation that we have graphically, but if there's any questions, we'll be happy to try to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
So like you said, we're happy to turn it back over to the council for any comments or questions that we can address at this time. And hopefully we can open up a fruitful dialogue here.
I, for one, would like to see more detailed plans. Can we go back to the plan drawing, please?
Sure.
So I don't see any topo lines on this plan, and I do think, you know, the wetland in this area is very wide and broad. We do not have steep slopes heading into this wetland. I'm sure that it was very inundated with several of the recent storms that we've had, and I think it would be interesting to include the topo lines on this so we could see the elevations, and that will help us better understand the hydrodynamics during high volume storm events. So if we could, you know, get that in the next submission, that would be helpful. My second question is the mitigation plan. So the green area you're showing us here is your mitigation plan? Is that what we're trying to say here? Because it's very light.
Yes.
I only see a handful of trees. I don't see how you're going to be able to keep invasive species under control at this site unless you plant more densely. I would certainly like to see trees, you know, in a mitigation plan. Generally, we see 220 about trees per acre, 340 shrubs per acre. So this is really light. There are no plugs proposed in this plan either, and I do think because of the intensive invasive species pressure we see here, that would, you know, really help keep things at bay. So certainly more plant density, I think, would help. I think at one point there was talk of a tree survey last time we saw this project. I don't know if there was a tree survey done. Probably there has been some changes since the last tree survey was done, if we did do one. So I think at one point the proposal was that 65 trees were going to be removed.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So that was based on a survey from when, Paul? Do we know?
I do not know the exact date, no. I'll try to find it.
Can I ask a question? This property has a for sale sign out in front of it, and I recall that there's a whole plan, there's drawings, there's architectural renderings, and then the property was put up for sale. Who owns it now?
Our client, Brook Manor Inc. is the owner of the property.
But it's for sale.
Correct.
And the
Which our
plan
client
is
has the right
sell
to.
it. The plan is to sell it with all the approvals and everything.
Correct.
Okay.
2018 was the survey was 2018 for the trees.
And so is it the same owner for the Highland Avenue side of the property? Or is that a
At this
different
time,
owner?
yes, it's currently one tax lot, so they are both under common ownership, or it is under common ownership.
But it is for sale.
Correct. And of course, any final subdivision approval will have required maintenance incorporated into that, as far as likely either easements or recorded homeowners associations, as this is going to be a condominium or apartment. So however it's going to be structured, there will be maintenance requirements built in to ensure that there's continued maintenance of stormwater infrastructure as well as any necessary maintenance of the wetlands mitigation proposals.
So this is the back end of the Birch Brook Apartments property that fronts onto Walden, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Just double checking.
Can anybody on the applicant side speak about any observations that they made during recent storm events?
To my knowledge, there have been no recent observations. I don't know if there's anything in particular you're looking for as far as what observations.
So I would mention here that I have not heard anything from the building department in regards to anything here. However, the planning board, there were several people from that immediate area that did mention there was flooding in their homes. Nobody mentioned that they walked the site to see if there was any flooding on that site, but they did mention that there was flooding in nearby homes in that area. So
We haven't verified if the stream has changed course or if there's been any major geographical change to the wetland area that might impact where the buffer zone should be.
can you ask that
Listen,
question?
Sorry. So there's been, since we've had the two major storms that have come through with significant water, no one has done a site survey to make sure that the stream that supplies this wetland area is still in the same geographical area, and the wetlands has not shifted or changed in any way that would affect the buffer zone, the required buffer zone.
Typically, this is Anthony Guccione from JMC. Typically, wetland flaggings are typically good for 5 years.
Okay.
A specific rain event doesn't change a wetland. Wetlands are identified based on hydrology, soils, plant materials that live there. So, it could have maybe flooded the stream potentially, but it really wouldn't create a different wetland from an isolated storm events.
Yeah, I'm not asking the question well, but
No, that's a very good point. I mean, wetlands do change, and that's why it's always important to have a relatively recent wetland survey. Can you please remind us when the wetland survey was done for this site?
It was 2018.
2018, so that's 3 years, yeah.
Is there any reason why the buffer shape doesn't match the actual wetland boundary shape on this drawing? On the left side?
Yeah, that was what was flagged by the wetlands consultant. Like we're saying, it's based on soils and vegetation, basically. So they go out, they
Right.
identify where those wetland soils are, and that's where they flag it, and that's where the surveyor picked it up. So it may not follow the water course, per se.
No, I understand that. I see that the wetland boundary is the blue dotted line, correct?
That's correct.
And
Yes.
the buffer area is the green line to the, that's usually the 100-foot, right?
Yes,
So
the
why-
100-foot radius that you offset.
That green line should correspond in shape and to the blue line, and it's got a different
So
shape.
can you, I think that there might be some confusion here. There's a wetland and there's a water course. The water course buffer is 50 feet, the wetlands buffer is 100 feet. Can you pull up the black and white map that shows the delineation?
Yeah, I don't know that this shows you can see the line that's flagged there.
This is the.
That's the same line that's colored blue on the other map. That's
It'd
the
be possible-
wetland that was delineated. The other line is just a 100-foot offset, but when you offset that point, it creates an arc. Because that's a constant 100 feet from that point.
Would it be possible,
If that makes sense.
would it be possible to enlarge that portion of the plan? Zoom in a little?
maybe clear to enlarge the colored one. I'm not sure. You able to do that, Paul, or no?
Can you see it or no?
We're still seeing the black and white.
Oh, let me reshare.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can see that,
You're
that
on the
blue line.
presentation. Yeah, so
Yeah, that blue line is the same line that you saw with the flags on the other one. And then if you offset that point that says WF6, that's wetland flag number 6 there, that creates an arc offsetting that point that sticks out. So that is a constant 100 feet from that line.
Okay. I don't believe I've ever seen that before.
Yeah, we
And
do
I
the same
look-
thing with property line, building setbacks and such. When there's a point, you do a radius.
Okay, okay.
That,
Can
but
you
that,
tell
that
us-
portion of the buffer is really up the hill. That where that green line is in the parking lot, that's about 50 feet higher than the site. It really goes up there.
Yeah, there's a steep, and that's why the topo lines would be so helpful. So there is a steep slope that drops from the edge of the parking lot, from the Birch Brook parking lot that's to the left of this drawing. And when we had done a site visit in January of 2020, I believe it was, 2019, excuse me, there is quite a bit of stormwater runoff that is flowing from that parking lot right down that slope into the wetland. And there was quite a bit of trash, large 5-gallon buckets. There was all kinds of, big trash in there. I know that you had mentioned that Kellogg Sessions recommended putting a fence. Can you show us with your mouse where exactly you're proposing to put that fence?
Before you answer that real quick, can you pull up JMC's drawing page DA2, proposed drainage area map? It has topo lines on it. I think that'll help illustrate what Erica's trying to get at. It does have the topo lines that she's looking for, and you can show how the.
Yeah. Or the grading plan would show that more clearly, probably, Paul.
yeah, I have the grading plan here.
Yeah, that has the same info.
Yeah.
So here's that topography. This is where our mitigation line goes to about. So it's the flatter area.
Right.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I was speaking and I was on, I had myself muted. So what we see is that there's a steep slope. It goes down into a very wide and broad wetland area. And then in the south end of the lot, there is there's a culvert. Right near where it says stone masonry retaining wall, there's a culvert. During high water events, it does look like there's potential for that parking lot or the buildings to get inundated.
Yeah, we did do a stormwater pollution prevention plan for this. It was reviewed by Kellogg Sessions, and we are providing a detention system. It's a subsurface detention system, which will detain the stormwater, and it won't be discharging from the site after development any more rapidly than it does prior to development. So that's the whole idea behind that system, as well as we've got a hydrodynamic separator to provide water quality before it goes into those chambers. So, as a result of the project, there really won't be an increase in the rate of runoff. So that won't be exacerbated by this project. And Kellogg Sessions did review that, and they were in agreement with our report.
But can we talk a little bit about so has there been any change to any treatment to the parking lot from the older part of the development where we see a lot of untreated runoff flowing right into the wetland?
You mean
Nothing on that site is
top of the
being
hill?
modified.
Not on up the hill, no.
'Cause I think
aside
that
from
was
cleaning
part
up
of-
the buffer area.
Right, because I think that was part of the recommendations from the 2019 comments.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this clear, so that I know you're going to write a report. I want to be able to communicate it well. One of the recommendations that you're saying is that something should be done on the existing multi-family property to keep some of that water on site and treat it before it makes its way downhill into the actual wetland, correct? Is that what you're saying?
I think that would really help the water quality in that wetland.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about how this submission is different from their prior submission?
It's the same submission. We're just providing additional details on the wetland mitigation in order to demonstrate the 1.75 or almost 2-to-1 mitigation
Yeah.
ratio.
I don't think that's accurate, Dan. I
Yeah.
apologize. The original plan had less wetlands mitigation. So I believe you did increase the amount of wetlands mitigation that you were going to do from just some simple plantings to extending the area that you're cleaning up the invasive species, and you're doing the New England mix. That's my recollection. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah, it's the same. I think what Dan meant was it's the same development plan, but we changed our plan to include the wetland mitigation, which includes going over the other side of the stream and cleaning out everything and cleaning out the trash, reseeding, and installing additional shrubs on the east side of that wetland bank.
And now in addition to that, we're proposing to add the posted rail fence
Yes.
to protect wildlife and keep any potential debris from blowing towards the wetland.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the trash that's falling into the wetlands, the vast majority of it is coming from the upland area. And a fence will certainly hide it from people's view, but it's still going to find its way in there.
Mm-hmm. There's some things that we might be able to do with retrofitting, so putting some snouts on some existing catch basins to help trap some of that trash. We understand that the applicant has also included some additional improvements to their trash area on the existing facility. So they have more strict rules and about where the refuse is going, and they're monitoring it on a daily basis as well. So that was something that we got from your original report, and they've taken it to heart. They've gotten rid of any trash and debris on site. And obviously, we have a delineated line that is going to be removing trash and debris within the wetland buffer. But if there is noticeable debris on the hillside, that will also be removed as well.
I don't have any other questions right now.
We have a hand up in the audience. Are they able to speak? Or not?
Please.
I'm not sure of the protocol.
I'm not sure either, but
Trustee White, I'm going to ask you to do me a huge favor, and I apologize.
And shut up.
As liaison, it's really more an observer's role right now. And I do want to make a point with regard to members of the public. This is not a public hearing. The public hearing is being held before the planning board. I do recognize there are some members of the public here. Madam Chair, I leave it to you, but any comments have to be kept short. And again, this is not a public hearing. It was never noticed as a public hearing. So it's important to keep that in mind. Many of these folks have already spoken before the planning board. Their remarks have been noted. I leave it to your discretion, Madam Chair, but I do want to make it clear this is not a public hearing.
And I'd like to make just a quick note to the public who's here listening as well. The planning board is the ultimate body that needs to make a decision on this wetlands permit. It's their responsibility to refer it out to the EAC. so that the EAC may report back to them, provide them information with their specific report. It's also their responsibility to hold a public hearing so that the community can take the opportunity to provide their public comments. There's no formal mechanism to communicate comments from the public through the EAC back to the planning board. So in order for your comment to be, on the record with the planning board, the decision-making body, you should take that comment to the planning board. You can, of course, make note of anything you've heard today and carry it forward. But there's no real way of, if you say something here, it's not part of the public record for the planning board to consider when they're making their decision. The only thing that is the EAC's report.
That being said, I would like to give the public an opportunity to speak.
I would request, Madam Chair, that there be at least I don't know how many folks there are, but there be some limitation as to what is said, and it should not be a give and take back and forth. They should make a statement, and then that would be it, please.
Probably limit it to like 2 minutes.
Sounds good.
We have Jim Drohan here. Mr. Drohan, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is James Drow and I live right next to the property on, I guess would be the northwestern side. I would just like to start off, we'll make a few statements. I believe that the area shown of the wetlands is not correct. Every flat piece of this property is subject to flooding, and I've seen it for the past 20 years that I've lived here. During one of the last storms, the fire department was called to my neighbor's house. Her house floods every single time it rains. I feel my heart breaks for this woman. She's an older woman. She will not come forward. So unfortunately, I have to be her voice tonight. The fire department was there for a flooding issue. I would like to talk about the trash. Of course, they don't know it, but unfortunately, they're not monitoring the property. I have a white trash bag that was thrown over the fence probably 2 weeks ago, and I've looked at it every day since. Approximately 10 years ago, they built a nice railroad tie wall, which I looked at, and I appreciate that they built it. However, every single railroad tie that they took out that was old was dumped into the slope area, which I look at every single winter, and that hasn't changed. We spoke about the culvert that is closest to the south side of the property. On heavy rains, that culvert overflows, and my neighbor across the street, whom I know on Fuller Road, he gets water in his yard every year, every time it rains. Sediment issues we talked about. I kind of find it hard to believe that they're going to control the sediment issues because they haven't done anything with the silt fence that's on the property now. It's all falling down, and this whole project has been nothing but a mess, to be honest with you. So, I mean, that's all I have for now. I don't think it's a great idea for a building of this size to be built on this property going forward. There's going to be a lot of challenges. As well as, I believe every time it rains, since they're going to be in that wet area, every time it rains, the back of that building is going to flood. So that's my piece. Thank you. I would like to say thank you to the committee for their hard work on this. And once again, thanks again.
Do we,
Now
other,
now we have more.
okay. Please, we can have some others speak, and please do keep it to 2 minutes. Thank you. You're muted.
Next person is Alexandra Farrell.
Hello, good evening. Alexandra Farrell, 78 Walden Road, another property kind of next to the proposed site. So just a couple of questions to kind of consider as you're going through this. So the wetlands markers on proposed lot 2, it looks like they go right up to the building. Wondering what is the buffer from the wetlands on lot 2 to the new construction? Just wondering It doesn't look like that appears to be 100 feet. Second, does the property that they will be flush cutting trees in the wetlands, it looks like it's Ridgewood Briarcliff LLC. Do they need a wetland permit on that piece? Also, is there an oil water separator in the stormwater management system that's being proposed? The overflow for the stormwater management system, it appears to go right into the wetlands, which seems like that would be untreated water going directly into the wetlands. And then finally, just have there been any studies on like endangered species, like bats, birds, or any other wildlife? I mean, it's really kind of a thriving ecosystem there. So just curious if there's been any studies done from a wildlife perspective, and the impacts that this would have. That's all on my end. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Those are great questions. I do know that in terms of endangered species, usually that needs to be correlated with the state Department of Environmental Conservation rare and endangered species maps, and that would have been triggered early on. So I don't think we have any endangered species, but that's all I would add to that. And I don't know if the contract, if we have any time for the contractor to address some of these questions quickly.
Are you asking the applicant team to address these comments?
Yes.
Okay. The only comment I think necessary to address right now, because I think a lot of them do relate to the site plan and the stormwater design, which has already been reviewed and approved, is the property and the any existing trash that might be there, which is being cleaned up and is all being it's all going to be removed and cleaned up as part of the mitigation plan. So there's extensive steps that will be taken to address those comments, but I think everything else has been addressed and reviewed during the initial site plan application process.
Okay. Yeah, I will echo what one of the commenters said, that there is a remaining silt fence there that's been there for several years. It's in very poor condition. The plastic is falling apart. It is, not just an eyesore, but an environmental hazard. It would be really great if that could be addressed. It's serving no function any longer, and the silt fence should really be removed because it's decomposing into microplastics.
Absolutely, we'll talk to our client about that. See if we can't get that taken care of immediately.
We have a copy on the village website of the stormwater pollution plan that we do have a stormwater expert on the EAC. And to be clear, has that changed since the initial submission?
No.
Yeah, I believe, so for this submission, to give you a sense of the background for the planning board process, the planning board needs to do a couple of things. One, obviously, is this wetlands permit needs to be completed and decision needs to be rendered on that. There's going to be an amendment to the neg deck. So seeker, as you mentioned earlier, Erica, has already been completed, but because the new application with the wetlands permit includes additional mitigation measures that were not part of it before, in order to ensure that those do get done to strengthen the neg deck, we're going to amend the neg deck. And so what remains to be done for the planning board is the amendment of that negative declaration to seeker, the completion of the final plat plan, and the wetlands permit.
Can the applicant talk a little bit about conversations with the village of Briarcliff on this? I have to say, I find it a little bit confusing, actually, that the address is listed as Highland Avenue. It really, the entrance is
Yeah.
proposed on Holden. And I think that probably it might interest some more folks in Briarcliff if they saw that the address was Walden instead of Highland Avenue.
So the address is listed as 8189 Highland right now because it's currently one tax lot. It has not been subdivided yet, so it does not have an address on Walden Road. Once it's subdivided and the final plat is recorded with the county and a separate tax lot is created, that lot will have an address on Walden Avenue. But all the public notices and all the signs and mailings that have gone out have identified that this site will have access on Walden Road. So we are not hiding the fact that this site is located along Highland, or Walden, I'm sorry. But we have been very clear throughout the process, throughout all the notices, that that is how the site will be oriented. As far as Briarcliff Manor goes, they have received copies of the application previously. They are included as a referral agency pursuant to general municipal law. They did issue comments previously with the initial submission. I don't recall whether they had any extensive comments, but I don't believe they did, other than ensure compliance with the wetland ordinance. And, as indicated, we've demonstrated that we are now in compliance with the new wetland ordinance and proposing almost a 2-to-1 wetland mitigation. But they have received referrals for this application.
And is that part of the public record?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions myself, but I'm not sure how many. I don't see all the participants. I don't know if there's any other folks out there.
Let me check. There's one person who's been raising and lowering their hand. So,
Roger.
okay. This is Roger Bhattacharya.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you all on the EAC for all the hard work you do. I know your time is volunteered, and certainly can appreciate all the time and effort you put in. I do want to just make clear that in 2021, Briarcliff Manor did pass a wetland law, and at the time when there was a submission to Briarcliff as prior to the wetland laws being passed in 2021. I do believe that there is a need for a re-review given the wetland buffer. There is a 100-foot wetland buffer that needs to be complied with. That's number one. Number two, after Hurricane Ida, or what we call a storm, and then the subsequent storm after that, I have some friends that live down that way, but I went to go check to see how bad things were. I even went around into the Birch Brook area just to see how that looked. That area was pretty heavily inundated with water. It looked like a pretty massive amount of water that was going into the actual stream itself. And you put in impervious surfaces into this, even the level of wetland buffer that's put in there would be overwhelmed by the level of water that comes in from these storms. This, by some reference in a separate meeting, was called a 1,000-year storm. But the reality is climate change is here. Climate change is here to stay. We are not going to see fewer of these. We're going to see more of these. This will be impacting quite a lot of properties. Even water runoff that was coming from the Birch Brook properties during the second storm was pretty substantial. The ground had already been saturated, even oversaturated. So it is really worth a look and see. I do not believe that all of what's been presented to you is up to date with the latest information. And I think it does behoove you all to have a look at the actual site itself after a pretty substantial rainstorm. Even if it's like an inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, whatever, it is important that we consider the impact to the environment, the amount of refuse that's still there that has not been cleaned up, like tires and other debris.
Madam Chair, we're past 2 minutes, just to let you know.
So I'll end with this. Just if for what we've seen thus far in terms of the trash and refuse, I'm not convinced that our environment will be cared for under this subdivision. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you all for the hard work you did.
Thank you.
So I do want to, I need to mention this because it's important to understand the responsibilities here as it pertains to the buffer area. So in this particular project, I think almost the entire development site, the buildings in particular, but also I think most of the impervious surface is in a buffer area right now. So I think that it's maybe a little bit of a kind of a misnomer to say, well, the buffer is not being expressed in all the right areas. For the purposes of this, I think that the buffer is being expressed that essentially the entire building and almost all of the impervious surface is in a buffer area. What that means is that the applicant is required to put forth a plan that meets at a minimum the 1-to-1 ratio. So even if the buffer area was drawn as larger, it wouldn't actually result in a net larger area to meet a mitigation number 2, if that makes any sense, right?
Mhm.
It's like if it was a basketball sitting in a 12-foot pool or a 50-foot pool, basketball is still the same size, right? So you just need to replace the mitigation measures correlates to the basketball, not to the size of the wetland around it. So that's an important piece here. So I think that their mitigation plan, I'm not here to sort of weigh into the quality of their mitigation plan. That's really something that's best reviewed by our wetlands consultant. They have reviewed it and done a memo. And I want to remind the board that you have the authority to request them to come here and talk about their review as well. So if you would like Keller Session to come here and be present at the next meeting, you can request that they come here. You would have to, of course, ask the applicant and ask the planning board for the additional time to do that. But you do have the authority to request that expertise to come and talk about the wetlands mitigation plan itself. And of course, you also have the opportunity to report back and put forth any recommendations. You've already listed at least one, which was to further treat the water uphill, which I think makes sense in a report. And there are other aspects here that you may determine that you want to put into that report. But the size of the wetland buffer, I don't think really gets to the meat of what's in front of you. What is in front of you is a review of the wetlands mitigation plan and whether a permit should be granted under this plan or whether that wetlands mitigation plan needs to be strengthened in order to meet what you feel is necessary for this area.
Can I just ask a legal question to the lawyers, and that is, if this building plan is approved and the lot is sold, what does that mean for the future buyer of the lot, the potential buyer of the lot? Will they have to stay within the same footprint that's been approved here, or can they reapply with a totally different building footprint?
Well, if they wanted to come in and build something new, they'd have to go through the planning process. Just simple. Right now, what is before you and before the plan, let me just say this, the planning board has given site plan approval to 5 townhouses. The zoning board of appeals has given a variance with regard to the 2 different lots. If someone new wants to build something that is totally different, then they would have to come back to the planning board under any circumstances. That's always been the case.
Yeah. And as Stuart can attest, developers buy properties and come forward all the time wanting to change plans, but the practical ability to do that is not quite so simple. Rules change, laws change, And those types of things can affect whether or not what was approved before could get approved again in the future. So as Stuart mentioned, what is approved is what has to be built. And if they want to build something else, they have to start all over.
Okay, thank you. I think that there's a lot of things that we need to review as a board, past documents, and I'd like to take a closer look at the resubmittal. So we will, do our best to get back to you with a letter, in a timely way.
You do have one last person who's here who has raised their hand. I don't know if you want.
Okay. Sorry, I don't see you. Don't mean to cut you off. Please, let's have a 2-minute comment.
That's Aaron Spring.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I apologize for coming on late. I think I might have missed some stuff. I just had a few clarification questions. They don't have to be answered tonight, but for future, I guess, findings, if you will, or what the EAC is looking at. I guess I was just wondering how, and again, I apologize if I missed this earlier, how does this proposal come into play with the wetlands policy and the building within 100 feet? 2, what is the plan for runoff, if there is one, given that once you substitute the forest land with concrete, it'll create a ton of runoff. So what is and given that this area is always being flooded, the neighbors in this area always have their basements flooded during a heavy storm, what is the plan, if at all, regarding the runoff? And how does this proposed property and proposed permit come into play with the wetlands in the surrounding area? Because from what I understand, Briarcliff is right next door and they have a wetlands policy. I believe the Village of Ossining has a wetlands policy. So I'm just trying to figure out not legality per se, but how this is being built so close to the wetlands and how that's going to be factored in. So again, that doesn't have to be answered tonight. And I do apologize if it was already answered. I came on late at another meeting, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as well. And how I guess this is an environmental issue. So I'll save this next question for the planning board. But those are my 2 big concerns, wetlands and runoff, and how this is going to be sustainable given that climate change is getting worse and these storms are getting worse. So I guess those are my comments. And I do appreciate everybody's time. And thank you to all volunteers on this board.
So the stormwater from what I understand, the stormwater from this particular proposal is going to be treated, there are certain design criteria that the applicant needs to satisfy that are based on, volumes, rainwater volumes established by, the state and federal government generally. So the applicant did submit a stormwater plan for this particular site. I think what's something that we talked about that's a little bit concerning to this board is the untreated runoff that comes from the extant parking lot, and that is certainly contributing. There is quite a bit of impervious surface up there. The slope does conduct that water down to the wide wetland at the site. So I do think that seeing any sort of treatment in terms of water quality and volume to the stormwater coming up the Birch Brook property would certainly improve the water quality in the wetland area. The Birch Brook property was built in the 1980s. There were different laws then. The new proposal is, within the, it is using modern design standards. But it is also true that you know, and I would love to have someone else speak about the legality of the variance, but the variance is basically, you know, it's a request to build in a regulated zone.
So I'm going to try to give a small little framework. I think this is probably good for, in particular, some of the new members to this board who may be a little less familiar with the wetlands ordinance. As some of you were involved in the writing of this ordinance, you're probably more familiar with it. So the way that the wetlands permit process works is that it, let me just bring it back to us. So there, it creates different categories. There are allowable, regulated, and prohibited activities. So some activities that are allowable are essentially things that you can do that are not subject to a wetlands permit. Things like ground maintenance, mowing your lawn, repairing an existing walkway or a wall, other, you know, minor things, or, you know, stuff that's done by Westchester County Department of Health, stuff like that. Then there are regulated activities. Those are more serious activities. Some of them not super serious, but some of them very serious. So placement or construction of any structure that requires a building permit is considered a regulated activity. So that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that it's regulated by a wetlands process. You have to get a permit. Part of that permit process is delineated into two tracks. That's the administrative path that can be done by the building inspector for very minor projects. And then there are larger wetlands permit applications that go to the planning board and are referred out to the EAC. So, you know, building within a wetlands buffer, a housing unit, for instance, like you're doing in this instance, is considered a regulated act. And then there are some things that are considered prohibited acts. So prohibited acts are, you know, it shall be unlawful to place or deposit chemical waste or to introduce influence of such thermal content so as to cause a deleterious ecological effect in any wetland, watercourse, water buffer, or buffer area. Also unlawful shall be the installation of a septic tank, the running of a sanitary sewer outfall, or the discharging of sewage treatment, effluent, or other liquid waste into or so as to drain into a wetland, watercourse, water body, or buffer area without the approval of the Westchester County Department of Health. This particular application has been reviewed by the Westchester Department of Public Health. So it's past that stage. It has not obviously gone through the internal wetlands permit process. But I would, you know, advise anybody from this body or even the public that's listening to take a look at section chapter 149 freshwater wetlands to better understand how that works. And of course, if you have questions and you'd like to reach out to me, you can always call me at the Village Department of Planning, and I can at least do my best to help guide you to where to find more information about how this works. So yes, I will send it in the chat right now. Aaron wants me to send the link to the.
May I ask, we have the applicant is here. Is there anything else that is needed from the applicant tonight? Because a lot of what's going on now is sort of more of an internal discussion. And I think the only thing that's being requested, I believe from the chair, is time to review the documents. The next EAC meeting happens to be Election Day, November 2nd. But what I would ask, now the next planning board meeting is actually at the end of the month, is actually October 26th. So, Madam Chair, you tell me, is it your impression you would like to have another discussion of this on the 2nd and then prepare your recommendation letter, or would you be in a position to prepare a recommendation in advance of that? Whichever is the preference of the board is okay. One would require that we get consent from the applicant for some additional time. The other, obviously, if you can work within 30 days, that's fine. But if you believe you need additional time, we just need to request that from the applicant and from the planning board. I don't anticipate any issue from the planning board.
Okay. I would like to speak with the other two members of the board who are not here tonight. They do have some expertise in this area, and I will get back to you regarding the timeline.
Okay, so why don't we do this then? from, you know, Dan, from your perspective, I'm gonna wait to hear back from the chair. It's possible this will get put over until November the 2nd, just but I'll wait to hear from the chair exactly, you know, what they want to do. I will try to get to the members of the board the documents that were previously submitted. Luckily, I have received more emails than I actually thought I had ever sent out or received. So I probably have them here. And that way we can see what, you know, when the next step will occur. But I think that's probably the best thing to do. Do any of the other folks who are members of the council have any questions for the applicant before we can let the applicant go for the night?
Thank you. No.
Okay. Then
And if I may just
go
make
ahead,
one
Dan.
request, that if there are comments that have been raised this evening that can be relayed to the planning board, we would appreciate that. I'm not in a position right now to consent to any extension. I would need to talk to my client. I would need to talk to our team about that. So if we can get some comments transmitted to the planning board and we can appear before them at the end of the month and discuss whether or not an extension is warranted or extension is necessary, I think that would be most appropriate.
Well, Dan, I appreciate that, and I'll be happy to be in touch, but I do want you to appreciate something. This is the first wetlands review that has been that has gone to the EAC. It is a brand new wetlands.
We're happy to be here.
No, but my point is that while I understand you have to speak with your client and with your team, if the EAC, the first go around, believes they need some additional time, it would really be helpful to know that they can get that additional time. I'm not saying they need it because they haven't indicated it, but to that extent. Additionally, I am more than happy to provide you with a transcript of tonight's meeting. We'll probably have it tomorrow. I don't guarantee the accuracy of the Google transcript, but it will at least provide you with some indication of some of the issues that were raised tonight. So that, and that, you know, that can also be provided to both to you folks and can go to the planning board. But, you know, I think the best thing is we'll wait to hear from Madam Chair to see if additional time is needed. Why don't we just do it that way? But
There's a video as well, so.
yeah, there. Are we videotaping, Jaime? Well, then
Yes.
you know what? It's even better. Because don't ask what the transcripts look like. There are words in there that I know none of you have said, but trust me, they appear in the transcript. Google Translate Google is interesting, or Zoom rather, is interesting how those come across. But okay, so we'll get that and we'll move from there. We will try to get, though, information to the planning board on some of the points that were raised tonight, many of which I think were already raised to the planning board on the 28th of September anyway.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Jaime, is the other applicant on tonight, or is that not going forward?
No, that was an error. So we had initially put them on in hopes that they would be ready to go today. They were or not. So I saw JB today, and he said we didn't know, and I said, well, you know, he's going to get the coastal assessment form, and hopefully we'll have an updated SWIP sometime soon. And then once we have an updated SWIP and a coastal assessment form, they can come forward. That is kind of the primary thing we're waiting for from them,
Okay.
right?
So we'll this one tonight. Good.
Are we gonna, is Rajiv Kapoor dropping off?
Yeah, I'm going to take them off right now.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah.
My biggest concern, and again, I apologize, I didn't ask the question very well, is that there has been significant amount of storms that have come through since the last time that wetlands was properly surveyed. I do trust Keller Sessions. So, you know, if they've signed off, that's one thing, but I think a recommendation for a new review of the area would not be out of line.
So I would just note again that if they delineated the wetlands and it grew, it wouldn't impact the site itself, considering I think like 100% of the site is in a wetlands buffer.
Yeah.
So if they move the lines out, I don't think it will affect it. Now, what you can do
Well,
is
they might actually be, except they might actually be in the not in the buffer, but, you know, in the water course. Could possibly be that, you know, the
Okay.
areas of the water course might have, you know, changed over time too.
okay.
Right?
So then if you think that it needs to be checked, then we can.
It's a
No.
fair recommendation
It's a
to
fair
make,
question.
fair
It's a fair
request to
question.
make to
Yeah,
the
It
planning
is.
board.
Fair question.
There really is, let me just say this. There is no, generally, they delineate the wetlands. There's no real provision where you say, well, we want you to go back and delineate it again.
yeah,
So, you know, because remember, there is a cost for everything that they're being, you know, to do. So it is part of that has to be kept in mind, but it can certainly be part of a request that's made to the planning board. And, you know, it's a recommendation. And if they wish to put that in as part of the process, they are welcome to do so.
Yeah, I think that the practical impacts of being in a buffer versus being in a wetlands, especially if that wetland has somehow migrated down towards that thing, I don't think it affects what they can receive. They could still receive a permit to get it. That being said, this is kind of like a tiered approval process where they're required to go get the wetland survey, develop the site plan, get the site plan, the initial subdivision done, then come up with the infrastructure plan, get that approved by the Department of Health, go through that process, and then come back here for this final plat plan afterwards.
Gotcha.
So for them to change it at this point,
it would be a big deal.
they'd have to start over essentially that entire process. I'm just not sure, like, I'm not sure what recourse the planning board has to request that. I think it's a fair ask, and we should find out from the planning board whether they can ask for that now at this point, especially if the old wetlands plan was put together within what's considered like a timely manner. So it's worth asking. I did think that your point, Erica, about the water sort of rolling downhill and getting treated before that's something that nobody seems to have picked up on up to this point, and that's really good pickup. I mean, that's why it comes to the AC, right? And Keller didn't mention anything about that. Nobody seems to pick that up, but that's a really important point.
Since I'm new to the committee, and this, from what you said, is the very first wetlands permit that's come to the group. You mentioned that Keller could be requested to come and speak to us. Just for myself, that would be helpful because I'm, like I said, very new to this process. If it's not something others would see useful, then that's fine, but I just wanted to lay that on the table.
I'm fine with them coming.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I work with Keller Sessions, and we basically have the same job, and so it's always nice to hear what other people have observed, because when you look at construction drawings, you don't always see the same things another person sees. So yeah, I think it would be, if we could get them to come in and speak, that would be good.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jaime, your point about that, with Erica's question about the water rolling down the hill, because that I think was kind of the entire impetus and problem we had with the original, was that it's a gully, they're building at the top. I mean, everything that the people do in the property is going to wind up in the water.
Well, yeah, and so, I mean, for me, and when I look back on the site notes that I put together in the January meeting, which I'm going to send to the group after this, there was oil sheen here. It certainly was parking lot runoff that was, affecting water quality. Like, my goal is, I want to make sure that the water quality is better at this site than how it was, how we've been observing. And so if we could get the applicant to do some sort of treatment of the contaminated runoff that's coming from the Birch Brook parking lot, that's a big deal. If I don't know how much we,
I think it's a good point. I think it's a good point, and I think it's important to. It's always important to focus on the project and not the people and not the developers, right?
no.
However contentious this project may have been in the past, they've already expressed that they're going to sell it. The next people who are going to move in, I believe it's going to be condo units. These people are going to own it. They're going to have a homeowners association that's going to be responsible for keeping that clean. And they're going to say, hey, what's going on with all this oil? Right? They're going to have that issue too. So it's an important question to ask. I don't know if it's already been answered in some of the documents that have been provided, but if it hasn't been, then it's a good question to ask and to figure out how do they strengthen that mitigation plan. The plan that they put forward obviously is their plan. It's been reviewed by Keller. Keller deemed it to meet the criteria of the 1-to-1, but the 1-to-1 is a minimum, and so it doesn't preclude the planning board from saying, hey, we think more needs to be done. So, that's the right approach. If you would like them to come, we would need to get that approved. So you can, of course, reach out to Keller Sessions directly. That doesn't require any of you. You can call them tomorrow and say, hey, I would like to talk to you about it. But if you want them to come back to this meeting next month, then that's going to require an extension beyond the 30 days. And that has to be agreed to on consensus.
I remember, didn't we have comments from them already? I mean, they basically haven't really changed this plan, right? Essentially, so what I'm not really understanding is they're basically not changing the footprint. They're proposing a larger mitigation, but they don't need, so the wetlands law doesn't trigger them to have to resubmit. They can just take their old plan, change the wetland mitigation aspect of it, and just keep going with the process.
Yes, because it's a wetlands application. That's all it is. They've done the site plan. They've done the preliminary subdivision approval. They've done all that. It's all that's done. Variances are done. The only reason they are before you now is because they did not have their final approval for their final plat. If they had that, they would never be before you. But it's only a wetlands application. That's all it is. Everything else is essentially signed and sealed.
And so are they required to, I'm sorry, are they, somebody has to say, does somebody have to say yes to a variance request?
They've got the variance.
But since they presented this wetland mitigation, I'm not sure I'm understanding how we can move forward here, what our options are. You are simply as you know, you just are a recommending body. The decision on the issuance of the wetlands permit is the purview of the planning board. They will decide if the wetlands permit is to be issued and if there are any conditions to be placed on that permit. That's what the planning board will do now that there is a pending wetlands application. There was no wetlands application before because there was no requirement for it before. Now that there's a wetlands ordinance, they had to file a wetlands application, which they've done. They are now going through the process, and Keller reviewed it. Keller came back with their comments. The planning board met on the 28th of September. They referred it to the EAC as is required by the code, and it goes to you for a report and recommendation. Then they ultimately make the determination as to whether that permit should be granted. Yeah, I mean, I wish we still had them here because I could ask them to pull it up, but
when we were doing our review for the planning board side of things, the original, plan called for some wetlands mitigation, but it was some plantings and some native species, to clean up, removal of invasive species. I think they've like doubled the size of area that they're cleaning up. And there's several more plantings that they didn't have last time. So it has changed. The question I think that the EAC is being asked here is that whether or not it has been changed sufficiently. If you have recommendations that it should be changed further, there should be more plantings, or there should be, more water filtration from the water uphill, or things of that nature, then that's something that you can put into your report. If you want to get Keller Sessions' input on, their review memo, then you can have them come back to this board. You can reach out to them directly. You can read the review memo. The review memo doesn't say a whole lot other than to provide a couple of comments that they mentioned, and to say that they read it and it meets that, threshold that was expressed, that, 1.75 threshold. So, again, if you think it should be a stronger wetlands mitigation plan, then I think the strength of what you have in front of you is the EAC can report back that this is not a strong enough plan and it should be stronger. And here's how we think you should make it stronger. And the planning board can take a look and evaluate those decisions and determine whether they agree or disagree. But by statute, I think that they will give, credence to what you say. They may not agree with everything. They may not decide to do every single thing, but they may decide to do everything. They may decide to do even more. They ultimately have to make that decision as well, but they're depending on the EAC to provide input.
So like, in the reality, since the applicant is interested in selling the property, ideally, if they do get approval, some sort of approval, it makes the property more marketable to resell. A new owner comes in before the board. Time could lapse, and potentially a new survey we couldn't require a new wetland survey. So there are some, ways that we could work within the confines to get the stormwater treated from the Birch Brook area before the property is sold, and then cross the bridge with a new developer when the time comes.
You could. I just want to make one point. I know the issue has been any owner can at any time sell their property. So you cannot base your decision on whether or not these people are going to sell, because that is unfair to the applicant and it's unfair to the process, because at any point in time, the property can be sold. The new owner would be as obligated as the current one to follow the requirements of whatever resolution is passed, be it the planning board, be it the zoning board, be it whichever board it is. And if they don't, they would be subject to a violation. Simple as that. But the fact that there is a for sale sign and that they may be looking to sell, obviously it's more valuable if they have their approvals granted, but that cannot figure into any recommendation that comes from the board, nor in terms of a resolution that is determined by any other land use board, because selling property is a fact of life, happens all the time. And, it can't be used as a sword or a shield, to say it simply. So I just want that to,
yeah, I want to echo what Stuart said. Selling of properties, subdividing and selling of properties is pretty standard, practice. This is very common. There are entire cottage industries dedicated to getting approvals and then selling those plans. Those people are commonly known as developers. Developers just put together plans. Most of them don't actually have the money to build it. There's a financing, entity, and there's a construction entity, and sometimes developers don't have any of those things. They just put together approval plans, and then they sell those plans off to some other entity. Happens all the time. That being said, I think that if you have particular requests that queue up other things, so if you're saying that prior to the subdivision of the property, that any water treatment mitigation measures should be completed on the sort of the multifamily property prior to subdividing off the part that's going to turn into condos, then I think that that's something that Land Use Council and the rest of us will work together to figure out how that's going to be written into the conditions of the approval. So I don't want to give you an answer of how that's going to work mechanically right now, because I just don't know. But if you are saying that you're recommending that changes be made to not just the Birch Brook, Manor condo site, but the Birch Brook Manor apartment site, and that those changes should be made prior to the subdivision of the land being allowed to go forward, then that makes sense. And that should probably happen to ensure that one entity who could legally separate itself after that subdivision takes place does what they're supposed to do. And there's a way to sort of ensure it happening. So
That's right.
that's something that we need to figure out how to do. And that would go into the approval resolution. I don't have the answer for that right now, but that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the water quality at that site is my concern. So however we can use the process and the framework that we've got to get the, that outdated lack of stormwater collection system remedied, it's important for us to just look, consider the water quality at the site.
Yeah. I do like Jaime's suggestion that we, just basically say, we don't think their mitigation plan is enough. This is what we would do to improve it, or what we recommend.
That's good advice.
And Erica, do you want to get input from the members who aren't here prior to?
I would. I do think that Tom did provide, and because I lost all my emails from last time, I'm going to have to speak with him. But certainly Tom did provide some stormwater input, possibly Kate as well. But Tom is a stormwater guy, so his input would be really helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm not sure if we are required to meet their 30-day, or if it's their permission we have.
If you do not get their permission and you do not act within 30 days, it's deemed that you consent.
So it sounds like it would behoove us to either make a decision that we can do this within 30 days, or request an extension that we can consider this at our next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that just the internal discussions that we've had on the staff side is that we don't expect that this will be getting approved in October. It won't be ready for approval in October. It won't be ready for approval by the planning board until November at the earliest, just saying. So I would certainly be communicating that to Birch Brook. I've already communicated that to Birch Brook attorney, so they're aware of that. I'm sure that they don't want to wait a minute longer than they have to, but I imagine the planning board would be amenable to giving you the 30 days. It's a question of whether Birch Brook would be willing to give you the extra 30 days. The question is, do you need an extra 30 days? Like, what do you hope to yield in the next 30 days? If you're going to bring them back in 30 days, or if you're going to bring Keller Session to come back and talk to the group in 30 days, that's one thing. If there is a desire for a couple of you to meet with Keller Session, I can coordinate discussion between a non-quorum quantity of you to meet with the Keller Sessions. Maybe 2 or 3 of you can meet with Keller Sessions at a time to talk about the application as well. So that is available to you if you'd like to do that as well.
And I guess one question is, Erica wants to get input from some of the other members. Does that have to be within an official meeting, or can that be as a sidebar?
Yeah, Erica, I think you pretty, regularly get those discussions outside of the meeting.
I'm new to this process, so I just want to check it out.
I have a question about Briarcliff. Roger said that they had revamped their wetlands legislation. And he said it at the planning board meeting too. And I actually looked it up, and in their E-code stuff, it says that it hasn't been updated since 2013, but I did find draft legislation from November 20th. So I'm wondering if anyone knows if they have actually.
I've not seen Briarcliff's.
I haven't either, Jessica, and like, we had to send our ordinance to them. They would have had to send it to us.
Oh, okay.
And I do not recall seeing, they've passed a couple of local laws, I know that. Now, they may have tweaked it, but they have certainly not done that. Folks, why is Roger still on this meeting? I'm quite serious.
Yeah, I'm seeing that there's
Yeah, all three attendees are still there.
Jaime?
They're, it's a public meeting. I mean, I don't know. I can't kick them out.
All right, well, I think then we need to conclude, okay, folks, because clearly this part should never have been out there like that.
okay. Let's conclude this conversation, and we will continue the dialogue. We'll provide some historical documentation for the newer members of the board via email, because again, we did lose some of our email background on here. We could move on to the next item of the agenda, which I believe is Jessica's tree policy, which I know has been kind of kicked to the side many times, but you did do some really important work, and I would love to share that with the rest of the board.
Yeah. Should I share my screen and pull it up?
Please.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did send it to everyone. Did everyone get it with all the email craziness? Okay. All right, let me just see. I've not shared my screen before. Let's see how to do it. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, so I reviewed pretty much everyone's tree ordinance, and, there's some municipalities that have nothing, like Peekskill has like one little paragraph, and Scarsdale has like a book. So I kind of went through everything and, kind of pulled out what I thought would make sense for us. And I'll just quickly take you through it and we can have a discussion. The first one is more just an administrative thing, because we updated the wetlands and there's stuff about trees in there. So we should, refer back to that and just reflect that in here. And then the protective native plants. Yeah, this is from Bedford. They have any tree designated by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation as a protected native plant. That's something that would require a permit. And I know there's not a ton of trees per se that are protected native plants, but it might be worth putting in. And then for the next one, for invasive plants, Yorktown has language that says no tree removal permit shall be required for anything that's considered an invasive species for our area. And that might be good, just get rid of invasives without paperwork. And then the open space one, that goes back to the natural resource inventory map, which I think we have, right? I think Kate did that as part of the open space project. So that was just, any areas of significant vegetation is something that would require a permit. A lot of these are just, you know, additional things that require a permit because we don't have a lot of those right now. And I think it would be good to do that. So then the next part, tree replacement. So we don't have a lot in our ordinance about tree replacement. And a lot of the other municipalities have a lot. The town has more than we do. I mean, the town has more trees than we do, but you know, they have where you have to replace 50%, you know, of what you remove, or you have to put money into a tree bank fund. I don't think we have a tree bank fund. Maybe we should start one. And the town of Newcastle, obviously they have a lot of trees, but they have some good language in there. All existing trees are subject to replacement. Any replacement plants that consist of more than 10 new trees should incorporate at least 3 separate types. Replanted trees should be ecologically compatible with the site and neighboring properties. Obviously, that's something we'd want to have. They should be the same or similar species when removed. You can have a total of 8 2-gallon size shrubs to replace 1 tree. And the approving authority may reduce the total required tree replacement where the trees proposed include invasive species such as Norwood maples. And then I thought this was really interesting from Scarsdale. Scarsdale, you should look at their tree ordinance. It's insane. But they have all trees planted which fail to survive 2 growing seasons shall be replaced by the permit holder at the expense of the permit holder. Said replacement shall be within the longer of 60 days following written notice from the village engineer, a period of time as may be specified in such notice, blah, 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 blah. So, and if they don't do that, then.
This is something that the city does. They require in all their contracts, they have an 18-month plant guarantee. It's standard in a lot of places to have at least 2 growing seasons of a plant guarantee, because the first 2 years of the tree's life of the transplant are, you know, really fragile time for the tree. And then, you know, I've seen it before where the street tree dies or the tree dies and then you just have a dead tree. So, and a lot of times these 2-year guarantees are actually reset with the new plant. A lot of places will come in, install a landscape project, and then just walk away and never water it, never maintain it, and then you're stuck with dead trees, and who's going to pay to replace that? And it's an eyesore. That's really
definitely don't want that.
That's really an excellent suggestion.
So this is another kind of housekeeping thing. I know that there was a resolution designating the EAC as the village's tree board in July. If that happened, then we should add that in. And then the last one is significant trees. So in our current code, the EAC is tasked with creating a significant tree list. I saw on the village website, there was a call for nominations for significant trees. Stuart would probably know if that ever happened, if there was ever a list or anything. But yeah, if that doesn't exist, then maybe we should start the process of compiling it.
That would be a great thing to have added to like the weekly email.
Yeah.
So let you know, public suggestions, because you know there's no way that all the members of this board can, you know, possibly know all the trees in the village. So certainly, you know, members of the general public could, you know,
what maybe I missed,
right? And then we could sort of say, oh, that's a good tree, but what if the person's like, that beautiful Norway maple should be protected? You know, we could say, actually, you know, it's an opportunity for us to also kind of educate the public about trees, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, what counts? What maybe I missed it. What is the definition of a significant tree? Just
maybe you need to come up with a list of what defines as a significant tree. I thought a Norway maple was a invasive species, though. I don't know.
It is.
Can we call that a significant tree? If
Well,
it's-
that's what I'm saying. So if the general public could provide candidates, suggest candidates, then, we could actually visit the tree, see what kind of tree it is. There are some other folks in the village who are tree experts. We have a number of tree experts in the village that I would love to. At one point, there was some talk of having a tree warden. And I spoke with the village manager about this, and then I'm not really sure where that went. I don't particularly feel qualified to be, the person who does this, but I hoping that we could find some volunteer spirited folks who could, work with the public, possibly on their suggestions, and then say, if somebody does suggest a Norway maple, we would say to them, actually, unfortunately, even though it is a big, beautiful tree, that tree is an invasive species, and, a learning opportunity for the general public. But I'm sure that there are enough folks in the village who know a thing or two about, enough about trees to say, that beautiful post oak on Clinton Avenue or whatever is, should be nominated, and we could have some, hopefully get some folks from the village to help us do that. We need to talk about soliciting help from other people, but someone else on this board qualified to do that, that would be great too. But trees, knowing trees is area of expertise that is a specialty.
Does being designated a significant tree provide them like protection from being chopped down, like add requirements that the village has to ensure that they are properly maintained and thriving?
Not sure. I'm not sure if you came upon any language like that, Jessica, in your travels, but in your exploration, but I would think so. I would think that it would provide certain protections that, the tree couldn't be cut. And traditionally, the tree warden, which is kind of an old New England position, it's an old municipal, position that, places have, especially in the Northeast. They would actually make a recommendation to the village for maintaining a lot, especially if they're in the right of way, if they're street trees. They would make recommendations to how and when the trees need to be maintained, which we do, if we could get an arborist. I did meet a gentleman, an Australian gentleman at one point. I think his name was Frank. I'm not sure what his last name is, if anyone else has met him on the board, but he's an arborist and would be great for this position. Whether or not he would take it, I'll pray to the heavens, but that could be a really awesome thing for us to have someone actively looking at least the significant trees that are in the public arena and, nature strips and things like that. Advising the village on how to be maintained. For example, I'm sure you guys have noticed maybe on South Highland Avenue by the rec center, there's a whole line of trees that are ashes that are dead.
Yeah.
Totally dead. And because of the emerald ash borer. So what do we do about that? The tree warden would be the person that would identify where there's, street trees in the quality of life arena of the citizenry, and would tell them, would those trees need to be replaced? And if we did, for example, have a tree bank or something like that, we could fund the replacement, or if we could get grants. We have some great grant writing going on right now at the village. If we could get grants to replace those trees, we just need someone who could do the footwork. So that would be really awesome. I think the significant tree thing could be good.
Okay.
So I guess the next step is how would we integrate this into the code? What the legal framework and mechanism would be to. Also, I guess my question is also this: did you come across anything in terms of penalizing folks for violating the code? How certain villages handle that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of those in here. Maybe I don't have anything in here. I did. It's been so long since I put this together. I can
Yeah,
pull
we're so sorry.
together. No, it's okay. I can add some of that stuff in here too. Make a list.
I mean, I would be curious because I do see people taking down native trees. And I have to wonder if if the penalty rests with the landscaper or the homeowner, who is the one that gets, because, it's sort of a parallel but different law is the the leaf blower law that the village has enacted. And I still see tons of people using leaf blowers during the regulated period. So I would be curious to see how we could actually this law some teeth. I see that the village does plenty of outreach about it. About the gas-powered leaf blower law. They talk about it in a lot of the emails. I'm sure it's changed some people's behavior, but there's still a lot of landscapers that are.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it would be interesting to, not just because the homeowner often relies on the landscaper to get the permit.
Yeah.
So, and the landscaper is the one who's supposed to inform the homeowner. What I think is, and I'm not sure, it might be just in each municipality's law, but the landscaper generally is the one who's educating the homeowner about the permit requirements. And so who is the one who's in violation, cut the tree, and who's the one that pays the fine or whatever. That'd be interesting to try and give it some teeth.
I thought under our current tree ordinance that there is a fine the homeowner pays. I know this simply because we try really hard to abide by it when we have to do something in our property.
So we do have a tree warden.
We do have tree ordinance, yeah. What is the fine? Are you asking me what the fine is?
Yeah, and who pays the fine?
I thought it was a homeowner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tree ordinance and the fine, I'm not actually sure. It was something that would be enforced by the building code enforcement officers. And I actually don't know. If you could get sent to the judge, but what's the standard fine? I'm not exactly sure.
Actually, we did have an experience with that. We took down a tree, I think at the beginning of 2020 with a permit, and then we had a geothermal system installed early in 2021. When the building inspector finally came out several months later to look at the geothermal system, he also wanted to look at the tree. So clearly he was the enforcement official who checked it out. But we had a permit, so I can't tell you what happens if you don't.
Yeah, so I have our current ordinance up, and it's a fine of not more than $1,000. And then for any additional offenses, a fine of not more than $2,000. And it looks like that's per tree.
Yeah, so what's interesting here is any person who violates the provision. So technically, and then it says in letter D, any penalty person or firm.
Yeah.
Because I do think that there should be some shared responsibility sometimes for these things. Not just the homeowner, but it's also the landscaper.
One thing, Erica, will we have an
Yes.
opportunity? Will we have an opportunity to respond to Jessica's review to see which pieces might be worth proposing to the village board?
Yeah, Jessica, I think Jessica shared the document with us, but maybe it was before you joined the board. So
No, I haven't.
Okay.
what do we do now that we have it? Do we say, yes, this is a good piece? Maybe
I
we,
would suggest add a comment using the, using the Google Doc software, just insert a comment. Using the tools or using the insert there, you can just add your comment to the, I find that a really productive way to have a discussion is,
Yeah.
and then as a committee, do we come to some sort of consensus before we move to recommending it?
I think that we will have a bulleted list of the changes that we want to make,
Mhm.
based on conversation, and then we would recommend that to the legal department and get the guidance from them on how to implement those changes. They would have to be voted on by the Board of Trustees.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, let's have an email discussion of this if everyone doesn't mind, because it's Jessica did a lot of important work here.
Yeah, great.
Really great work. Excellent. I was sort of taken with Newcastle's approach. They just go into excruciating detail. Pretty amazing. Okay, so I will mark it up and send it to Jessica. Or
But she'll see the changes as you make them. So once you
Okay.
comment it.
Yeah, everyone can just go in and comment on it. And
All
then I
right.
and then I can update it based on everybody's feedback.
Yeah.
great work doing all that.
Does anybody have any comments on the tree ordinance?
I thought almost every item was worth including, except, I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll down. I had it open on my computer. I'm not convinced that all of the mitigation efforts that Newcastle proposed were perhaps worth getting into here. But if someone else is, I can be persuaded. For instance, the replacing of trees with multiple shrubs. Was this it? All the others seemed really, really logical to me.
Yeah, I think that having the 3 different tree genus is great. Or I would say species. You can have 2 different types of maple, and that's fine. I would, probably change that to species. I think it's also really nice for them to include that they should, I don't think, all existing trees are subject to replacement. So say you have someone that comes in and there's, they want to clear 50 trees, because I've seen this recently, where somebody wants to come in and they want to clear, if, for example, in this situation, they wanted to clear 100 trees, but their claim was that, and it's probably true, but still the claim was that 60 of those 100 trees were not native species, so they shouldn't really have to replace those. But, trees do have, an effect on water quality, on stormwater issues.
Right.
So, I think that's an important thing to include, that even if somebody's cutting down non-native trees, they should have to replace them. And I like the idea of the tree bank, because as we've seen in other projects that come up recently, for example, the 14 Water Street, they are cutting down 1 tree. That area has a 39 out of 100 tree score. If the applicant was required by the tree policy to, in lieu of planting a tree, because they basically, probably won't have enough room in the site to plant another tree, if they can plant a tree elsewhere in that area, that's great. So I like the tree bank idea.
That's a great idea.
It can be abused, but depending on how the other towns structure that, I think it could be good for us, because we're really tight village. It's not a lot of space for us to work with.
Right. Right. And I think that since a lot of redevelopment within the built area of the village isn't going to create any more green space, it's going to just keep a steady state or erode it. we have to be very jealous about guarding what we have and planting trees where we can.
Agree. So, so yeah, let's work on providing our comments. Let's all have a look at this. Please provide comments, and then, you know, I think we should come up with a bulleted list based on everyone's comments of the pieces of this policy that we'd like to see integrated into the village policy.
That makes sense.
Can we agree to, Jessica, would you mind working on the, you know, doing the bullets after you comments? Can we say like by, you know, in what's a good reasonable amount of time for the folks on this call? Maybe in by the early October? Is that too long, too short? I know this time is really tough for me right now. I've had a lot going on. It's been really hard for me to spread my attention elsewhere, and I apologize for that. But I think for me, early October is reasonable.
You mean early November?
Excuse me, earlier November. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I have
you know,
the sports are eating my weekend. You know, all my kids are in sports, and I've been so busy. You know, forget it. So my mind is crazy. My mind is really crazy, and I really do want to focus on this.
Well,
Early November.
Yeah, our next meeting, November 2nd, maybe by then. Well, doesn't matter to me, really.
Okay. Yeah, let's make it a goal to have comments to Jessica by the next meeting. You're not going to have to talk about it by the next meeting, but it's, you know, nice to have a tidy goal for us to work to time.
yeah, and then once I have everyone's feedback, I can quickly pull something together.
Awesome. Okay. If and no one else has any comments, I'd like to move on. I don't think we have any other items on the agenda. So to go back to what the previous subject of the conversation, I will forward some documents to the folks on this call from the EAC and from the village that, you know, they might not have seen before, just to give a little bit of background. And then if we could all please, if anybody else has any, I will summarize some of the comments that we made. If anybody else has any additional comments that they think of, please send that to me. I will try and get some input from Tom and Kate. And, you know, we see what we could do about timeline to submit something to the village board, the planning board. And I you know, I don't want to unnecessarily hold up the applicant, of course. But like I said, this is a project that does require a lot of focus, and they're all volunteers with busy lives. So, you know, I do think we probably are going to need a little bit of extra time to get all our ducks in a row here.
Yeah.
Based on what
you said, I don't feel too bad about asking for it, because if it all, or maybe it was stored, if it already looks like the planning board won't be considering it until their meeting, which is at the end of November, if we need it and request an additional 30 days to think of it talk about it at our next meeting, it would not be throwing a wrench in the process. But if we don't need it, that's fine too.
Yeah, I think that I just want to remind you that you do have to ask for it, but you have to give a reason for why you need it also.
Yeah.
So as long as there's a reason, I don't, you know, see it being too difficult to get that request. They need to also look at their other approvals, zoning approvals and everything else, make sure everything lines up, and consider how that's going to impact things. But if you need the time, you just have to be explicit about why you need it and what you're hoping to get out of the extra time.
I'm wondering if any folks on this call on the EAC would be interested in arranging a site visit. You know, we could have a 1 hour visit.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want, when do you want to do that though? Like during the day, on the week, during, you know, on the weekend? What are we talking about?
I am available during the week, but I'm retired, and I know that other folks may not be.
I'm available.
I'm available in the, generally after 3 o'clock during the week, and on the weekends, it depends on sports.
After 3 o'clock on Thursdays are probably the best days. Thursdays.
3 o'clock on Thursday?
Thursdays
So-
are, there's nothing going on Thursday evening, so it's usually.
This Thursday is not working for me, but I could do potentially the following Thursday. So do we want, how about we suggest to the, we would probably do a visit with the applicant, right, Jaime?
No, I wouldn't, but I mean, we can see if we can get Keller Sessions there. I have to find out about how many people can go at the same time. So that's the only question.
So we surely need to give them a heads up and ask their permission before we visit the site, right?
No.
No?
Nope.
Private property, right?
Well, they have an application in front of us, so when they apply, they sign a paper that gives the reviewing bodies the authority to go on the site. So I mean, no.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it's nice to give them a heads up. You give them a heads up so you can get shot at or something.
Mm.
Some places that's like maybe not a bad idea, but generally speaking, no. I mean, we can just go. I from time to time like to just go and check on properties, especially if I have concerns.
I see.
That they may move something if I don't, if I tell them that I'm coming. So I don't think that we need to get their permission.
Okay, that's good to know.
I'll check with Stuart.
Yeah, why don't we try to look at the next two, I'll suggest the next 2 Thursdays. And if you guys want to look into it and email me back, obviously not this Thursday, but the following Thursday and the Thursday after that.
Thursday at 3 is a good time, I think, for me.
Thursday at 3?
Thursday at 3, any Thursday at 3 is a good time.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. So why don't we go ahead and plan that? I would like to see if, let's circle back with Tom and Kate. And arrange that.
All right.
Okay. All right. I have no additional comments except that, Jaime, just to remind you, if you do somehow come across Keller's previous comments, or if you can get them to resend us their
So
previous
I have them.
comments.
I don't know why they're not on the EAC agenda. I do apologize for that. They're on the planning board agenda though. So if you want to pull them up, I mean, I'm going to show you real fast because they are there. I was looking at them earlier.
No, let's look at them. Let's all look at them in our own private time.
Okay, all right, yeah. Just if you go to the same place you find the EAC agendas, you'll see under recent meetings, that's the Board of Architectural Review and Planning Board, September 28th, 2021. It's on there, and it has Keller's Wetlands Permit Review Memo. And like I mentioned, it was not particularly long, so it'll take you about 5 minutes to read it. Maybe not even that long. It's 2 pages, 2 half pages, so basically 1 page. It has 2 comments. So.
I mean, I just have to say, I would like to, I think it's important for us to see the previous comments they submitted. I'm not 100% sure that if we invited them to speak to us, they would add anything new to that. And I'm not sure if it's worth the expense, to be honest, to have them come in.
It doesn't cost us anything. It costs the applicant.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it doesn't cost us. I mean, the applicant has to pay for them to go. And so it's really up to you. I think that if you think that it's going to help you, or if you're on the fence, I mean, then it doesn't hurt to invite them. If they can come, they can come. They're right down the street in North Castle. So,
do you think they could come to the field meeting?
Yeah,
maybe we can.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like we can.
Yeah.
Once you settle in on a date, we can let them know if they're available. We can say, hey, can you send somebody? There's maybe Joe Tremelli can come. Maybe the wetlands specialist can come. I mean, I do think that they take their responsibility serious. So
yeah,
I
think that's the most useful. That's the most useful way to integrate them into this process, is to have them do a field meeting with us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.